we're staying at the, I would say the level of the self here with Francisco Cruces' talk. And I'd like to introduce him now. Francisco Cruces is a professor of anthropology at UNED, or the Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia in Spain, where he coordinates the Urban Culture Study Group. His research focuses on forms of symbolic expression in urban settings, from music, festivals, and political demonstrations to the making of intimate space, with fieldwork in Madrid, Mexico City, Bogota, and Montevideo. He has published several monographs on urban life, edited and co-authored collective books around a variety of forms of cultural production, and is also co-director of the documentary film The Order I Live In, an indoor urban symphony, which is open access and available via the link in his speaker page on our website, happinessintroubled.times.ca. Currently, he is working on Metropolitan Intimacies, a collaborative ethnography on the narratives and poetics of dwelling. Francisco, welcome.
Thank you very much, Marta. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, happiness is a big word. Few things seem so important for us in daily life, and yet few have so little place in social scientific discourse. We have a sociology of work, an economic anthropology, a history of mentalities, but as far as I know, there is not at our universities a department or a faculty on happiness. And I am not brave enough to call for the foundation, but I celebrate this happy initiative by Marta, Radice, and the Dalhousie University, which I think is very much needed. Not only because ours is a troubled world, of course it is, but I do not think that the world was any time not a troubled place. It is necessary because happiness, in its infinite varieties of expression and imagination, is at the center of the lives of the people we study. At least in certain idea of happiness, it's pursue particular forms of happiness. Of course, in life there are always problems, suffering, oblivion, anxiety, illness, death. But when you ask people, who are you? What's your life like? What are the things you live for? At least an important part of the answer has invariably to do with happiness, with images of the good life, with little things that count, with cherished objects, warm memories, dreamy projects, moving tunes, and beloved persons. And yet, very few things are so difficult to grasp to say something meaningful about them. Happiness share this condition, this flow, with my recent topic of research, which is intimacy. Like happiness, intimacy means everything and nothing. What is intimate? The domestic, the home, the self, privacy, secrets, the body, sex, subjectivity, a mix of all these things. These categories, happiness and intimacy, are not only fuzzy and messy, difficult to circumscribe, they are also problematic, plural, contested. We recognize this by speaking on intimacies in the plural. The ways to feel in proximity and familiarity are manifold. With happiness, this recognition of plurality sounds even more difficult. We should wonder why. Maybe this topic suffers from a universalism of origin. Anyways, no institution is going to raise funds for a department on happinesses. Although I doubt this after the talk from Carol, that I really can get some money from my institution for that. For an anthropologist to contribute to this discussion, I find it best to think small, to pluralize and historize and contextualize the concept, to identify different narratives in which the idea of happiness works. Therefore, I have chosen to rephrase the topic of this conference in my talk as little joys and agonies of the self. What I defend here comes from a particular fieldwork in 3 Latin cities, so it surely lacks universal application. But I will try to revolve on the relation between happiness on the one hand and intimacy on the other. It can be summarized as this. First, happiness is today unthinkable without intimacy. In the modern sense of the word, as a space of individual self-determination that results from the imperative to become yourself, that which Jean-Claude Kaufmann has called the modern injunction to have an identity, to be or to become someone. Ours is the age of the right to intimacy. This does not mean that the late modern individualism is the magic key for happiness. And I think that Joe has shown this very clearly. It means that our horizon of happiness, whatever it may be, the stage in which we can imagine today to have a happy life, to become fulfilled subjects, is necessarily one which tries to reconcile individuality with the multiple belongings and social dependencies of the individual. Second, this situation is not necessarily happy or unhappy, but very ambivalent. The self who aspires to self-determination is relatively loosened from other identity boundaries and dependencies: nation, gender, class, race, religion, and other social destinies. In the same degree that he or she accedes to new possible futures, he or she also becomes exposed to hazards, uncertainties, and precarity. It is hard to live in this kind of exposure without a roof. Third, the happiness which intimacy provides for has to do with the search and creation of meaning. In my view, intimacy building is meaning-making. Intimacy is a context of closeness and familiarity in which both processes, closeness and meaning, become entangled. There is a circular, mutual constitution among the subjects and their social, material, and symbolic environments. Hence, happiness is only conceivable for a subject in relation, not for an isolated individual. I would like to ethnographically illustrate these ideas with the support of 4 little stories by 4 of my informants. Ethnography is at the end a form of storytelling. Actually, I didn't know I was working on happiness until Marta Radice saw the order I live in, the documentary that Jorge Moreno Andres and myself made on intimacy building in 3 cities. Marta's comment was like, "This is a contribution to the anthropology of happiness." So Marta, thank you for pushing me to reflect on my material from this particular point of view. This is precisely the exercise I want to share with you today. I'm going to project 4 sequences from the movie, short monologues, each one by a different character. It is also a making of. So now I share my, let me see, my screen with you, that I hope it works. Can you tell me if it is to be seen there?
Yep. Yes, we can see your screen.
Yes, let me, because there is something here which is impeding me. Ah, now, okay, it goes.
A mí me llegó a pasar que en un momento saliendo rápido a trabajar, terminé de darme la ducha y por ahí la toalla húmeda queda arriba de la cama, y cuando venía tenía un regaño de que, o de cuando vivía con mis padres, de que no se deja la toalla húmeda arriba de la cama, o tal cosa, o tal. Y acá pasa algo fantástico y mágico, que era la toalla seguía estando en la cama y no había regaño, y lo que había era una cama mojada por la toalla húmeda. Entonces no había quien modificara las cosas del lugar. Y era una dimensión, para mí era totalmente novedoso. Capaz que para alguien que vivió solo más tiempo es algo obvio lo que estoy diciendo, pero yo no había vivido solo. Y las cosas permanecían mágicamente en el lugar que uno las había dejado.
Y entonces uno como que se descarga y y limpia así a full como un endemoniado, como que si estuvieras descargando tu ira y fregás. Y bueno, y eso, y con agua así mojándote, que no importa nada, que en todos los ámbitos de la vida vos te mojás el pantalón y decís, ay, me mojé el pantalón, me mojé el buzo y ahora tengo que salir. Y en ese momento mojarte no importa nada, porque estás vos ahí y no vas a salir y nadie te va a ver. Entonces es espectacular estar lavando el baño, que agarras ¿cómo es? El duchero, de esos que se sacan, ¿viste? Que es y empezás a, como si fuera un arma, empezás a enjuagar todas las paredes, el bidet y el inodoro y la pileta, y está genial eso, está espectacular. Y bueno, es como una terapia lavar el baño.
En esa, bueno, empezamos a mudarnos mucho después, y no solo de ciudad, sino de casas. O sea, vivíamos un tiempo en una casa y nos mudábamos a otra. No sé por qué y no he preguntado tampoco. El punto es que nos mudábamos y a mí esa tanta mudanza me provocaba como la sensación como de evanescencia de mi propio ser, ¿no? O sea, en ese momento claro que no lo pensaba así, con esas palabras, pero sí sentía como que, no sé, era como si me diera miedo desaparecer, ¿no? Entonces, como por la segunda casa en León, se me ocurrió que yo quería escribir mi nombre en la pared para que supieran que yo había estado ahí y que había vivido ahí. Porque siempre que llegábamos a una casa nueva yo veía los objetos que quedaban, las marcas en las paredes, y me preguntaba cómo se había visto esa casa antes, quiénes habían sido las personas que habían vivido ahí, cómo habían sido. Y entonces yo quería que la siguiente familia o la siguiente persona que llegara ahí se preguntara por quién había sido yo, ¿no? Entonces quería escribir mi nombre, pero sabía que si lo escribía en la pared de mi recámara o en la puerta, pues me iban a regañar tremendamente. Y lo que hice fue que me metí con un crayón azul al closet y rayé mi nombre en la parte de abajo. Era una de estas paredes que son como rugosas. Entonces quedó el crayón hasta lo más profundo. Y escribí mi nombre y se sintió bien, me gustó. Y a la siguiente casa lo hice. Y así lo fui haciendo en cada casa. Y después evolucionó la cosa y le empecé a poner la fecha en que llegué y la fecha en que me iba. Porque además, con tanto movimiento, para mí se empezaron a volver como importantes las fechas, ¿no? Tener claro en cuándo había pasado qué cosa. Entonces siempre tenía muy claro, por ejemplo, recuerdo muy bien que cuando la primera vez me mudé a León era un 16 de octubre, yo tenía 6 años. Cuando me mudé a Jalapa fue un 4 de agosto, así, ¿no? O sea, entonces iba poniendo la fecha de llegada y la fecha en la que me iba.
A mí me tocó, mi madre no quería venir, no quería volver. A mí también me costaba mucho volver a esta casa porque había quedado todo en su lugar, ¿verdad? Todas las habitaciones, todos los lugares habían quedado como mi abuelo los había dejado. Y a mí me costaba mucho, pero finalmente pude volver. Y me tocó la tarea de limpiarla, digamos, de vaciar la casa y de elegir las cosas que se quedaban, de las que no. Y bueno, fue un momento bastante difícil. Encontré cosas además, encontré un montón de cosas que me emocionaron mucho, por ejemplo, y que no sabía que estaban acá. Mi abuelo guardaba en su billetera un par de dibujos que yo le había hecho de cuando era muy chiquita, porque eran trazos de niña, de él y de mí tomados de la mano. Y a mí eso me emociona mucho porque yo no tenía ni idea que mi abuelo guardaba eso y que lo llevaba siempre con él, porque la billetera la llevaba para todos lados, o sea que...
Okay. This was the making of The Order I Live In, which is the documentary we made. In these sequences, different things appear. We have 4 short stories about apparently minor trifles: a towel, the cleaning of a bathroom, a signature inside the closet, a little girl drawing of her and her grandpa holding hands. None of these micro-stories talk directly about happiness, and yet some non-evident aspects of intimacy very relevant to our topic emerge here. The 4 scarps go separated by words: displacement, closure, signature, and reverberation. I cannot explain them in full, but they are poetic processes, not in the sense of words making poetry or poems, but in a broader sense of poiesis or creation of meaning, of framing things in such a form that they produce relations, order the world, make sense, and make objects to become part of a bigger, meaningful whole, a universe, a constellation, an atmosphere, an order of your own. This was a making of also. So the whole second part of the teaser narrates the very making of the movie, the field journey, the musical and visual composition. You can notice, for instance, how images of clothes through a window are artfully composed as a painting by Gloria Duran, the artist in our team. And finally, the screening with many of the participants in Madrid and Montevideo. This is a way to show that the same poetics that work in the making of everyday life are also at work in the meta-narratives that experts like the ethnographer make about them. There are 2 remarkable things about storytelling, which is what we are discussing here, is about the narratives. One, they are extremely articulate. This fieldwork experience was for me a source of continual surprise and unexpected enlightenment. People think a great deal about their lives. Everyone is an expert in his or her own intimacy. And the ethnographer does well in letting them speak by themselves. Second, these stories are very good. Some have dramatic structure. Others are beautifully told. It is shocking not only how cleaning a bathroom can be a source of joy, but also how this can be so well recounted. In the signature inside the closet tale, as well as in the drawing in the wallet, what folklorists has called poetic justice appears in the form of good, surprising, round endings. These 2 dimensions of the storytelling, moral content and good form, seem to be somehow connected. Intimacy is a creature of language. It is made of words, but not any kind of words. Intimacy is necessarily poetic in the sense that produces and reflects the entanglement between the subject and his or her world. In certain homes, a towel ceases to be just a towel. A closet becomes a person and her memory. The bathroom is a psychoanalytical chaiselong, and the wallet of a grandfather, an archive of family life. So we have here archives, psychoanalytical chaiselong, and all the things we have been discussing in the former talks. In this transformative plot, things become entangled, and their meaning densified and resignified time and time again. There is displacement. Things we used to think of separately begin to be, by the force of time and the eventfulness of home life, bound together. Displacement is both spatial and semantic. There is also closure, because in this mess of continually displaced meanings and things, which is a home, ego, the dweller, cleans, tidies up, makes order, cuts and pastes. Signature means that everything around us carries these marks of the subject, like the traces that our living leaves when we move from a home. Finally, reverberation refers to the ways in which these poetic effects are received, understood, and amplified. People living together act in tune and in sync by connecting or not to the vibes of the others. Sometimes, as it happens to the woman of the drawing, the other becomes the custodian of your own life. Like the character of Penelope in the Odyssey, ego waves and unravels his or her relation to the world. I would not call this happiness, but there are definitely forms of joy and sorrow here, pleasures and agonies, contained in the plot of these stories of the self. Maybe there is not a true self, a real ego after and under these intimate stories. Maybe there are only narratives, just tales, things beautifully or badly told, not the truth nor reality. And yet, despite so much critique of authenticity, despite so much deconstruction, so much Foucauldian suspicion about the unity or the credibility or the autonomy of the self, I wonder about the promises and happiness contained in these narratives, about its sources of coherence and veracity. These little things indeed made sense to the people who share them on camera. They talk about an open quest for meaning and their ambivalent answers to this late modern problem of the imperative of become yourself. I find in these little stories clues for happiness, a hope. They have to do with three things. First, the rejoicing in oneself, what some French authors has called la jouissance de soi. There is a happiness in being alive, in being oneself, in being able to share it. And this discovery of one's own order is the basic source of these narratives of the self. Second, the moral economy of the circulation of the gift in daily life. Among the entanglements of the subject in relation, the most moving and powerful has to do with the circulation of gifts, objects, conversations, and memories that makes life shared and generous. The circuit blurs the rigid frontiers between mine and yours, between me and us, and provides the subject the mysterious privilege of self-abandonment. Third, the inexhaustibility of the everyday, its abundance of details, its infinity of nuances, makes a quest for happiness both possible and desirable. I found this beautiful idea the other day in the writing of a Finnish colleague, Susan Osterlund-Poltz, about the work of Georges Perec, the French novelist who made crazy long lists and inventories of everyday life. She noticed how these impossible inventories testify that ordinary life cannot actually be exhausted. Maybe the efforts of the ethnographer are similarly vain, and there is too much to discover and to show in the life of anyone. A final reflection, and I finished. Modernity lacks a tale. Many of the big narratives which unified the modern world and gave it a sense of direction has become, if not eroded, at least volatile. I'm thinking of the secular narratives of liberalism, socialism, nationalism, as well in religious ones, like the big religions of the book. I could put here, of course, psychoanalysis or literature or music, and of course science, which is so good at managing the world, but too curt and somber for narrating it. Speaking of happiness, we have also utopias, which are big tales that promise happiness for all. And dystopias, much more common nowadays, global narratives, which promise a happiness everywhere. Compared to all this, these little narratives of common people in the everyday life may seem modest in scope, and yet I find in them the allure of intimacy and very powerful images about how to live a good life in common.